welcome. There's much to talk about, as you can imagine. Let's get to our panel. Joining us here in Washington is Christopher Young. He's the Director of East Asian Studies at Marine Corps University. Zhang covers diplomatic and security news as the Chief Correspondent for Shanghai Wen Hui Daily. With us from Los Angeles is attorney Ronald Cheng. He focuses on data security, privacy and anti-corruption laws. And Yun Sun is a senior associate with the Stimson Center's East Asia program right here in Washington, D.C. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Ronald Cheng, let me start with you out west in Los Angeles. Cybersecurity, cybercrime, internet fraud, these are the new threats facing the world. They are 21st century issues. How big is this a problem between China and the United States?
I would say for both countries, this is a very serious issue. On the Chinese side, of course, the stress is on internet fraud. There is a fairly large cell phone fraud problem. On the U.S. side, you have a fairly extensive problem ranging across all areas, from fraud to compromise of critical infrastructures, both on the governmental and private area. And frankly, both countries are paying a lot of attention to combating cybercrime and strengthening their regulatory regimes and the state of preparation on the private side in order to prevent against these kinds of threats.
Song, there was an agreement in 2015 between China and the United States on cybersecurity. How effective has that agreement been in enhancing cooperation between the two countries in diffusing tensions?
I think this cybersecurity issue...
Ronald, I'll get to you in a moment. Go ahead, Song.
Okay, I think this cybersecurity issue is quite new for both countries because this industry, this technology has been developing so fast. And I still remember just a few weeks before President Xi's visit in Washington in 2015, the OPM issue suddenly became very, very hot in the United States. That made China to be quite surprised. So there was a lot of discussion between President Xi and Mr. Obama on this issue, and there was an agreement on this issue. And after that, we had at least three times high-level discussions among the two countries' concerned ministries. And I think the cybersecurity dialogue and relationship between the two countries has been quite all right. And as I read one report prepared by U.S.-China Chamber of Commerce just last week to the USTR 301 investigation, they have been saying that this issue has been significantly improved since 2015. And now the cyber theft of intellectual properties has been reduced significantly from Chinese side.
Right, Ronald, you wanted to say something on the effectiveness of that 2015 agreement.
Oh, I apologize. I just wanted to say that I think the most significant thing is that there was an airing of the issue. I would say in terms of substantive results, this really is an issue in progress. On the U.S. side, there have been a number of prosecutions that are aimed at alleged theft. On the Chinese side, there is some conflict as to what the effect of that has been, but I tend to believe that this is going to be an issue that will continue to be discussed and will continue to develop on both sides.
Okay, Christopher, go ahead.
So with regard to the effectiveness question, there are two ways you can look at how to measure that. The first is, I agree, it's a work in progress. However, some of our IT monitors, observers of these types of threats have published in the open forum that these types of persistent threats have gone down. That is, they have statistically pointed out that prior to that agreement, there were 40 of these types of attacks per day. That's dropped down to, say, 10 to 12 of those. And so there's that example. The second, from the U.S. side, this is a positive development. The fact that the Chinese have admitted or come out and said, yeah, this is an issue that we will work on. That is, before that agreement, the Chinese government would not come out and say, this is a problem. There was always talking past one another. And at least after that agreement, there was an acknowledgement that this is something that needed to be worked on.
Yeah, there is a distinction which the American government has made clear, and that is it says, yes, it does engage in cyber intelligence gathering, but that's for national security purposes. It doesn't engage in intelligence gathering to benefit American companies.
Yes, yeah, and that's a distinction that some cybersecurity experts sometimes scoff at, where they would say that there are certainly examples where the National Security Agency or some of our government agencies do monitor and do engage in cyber activities strictly from our perspective, strictly for the purposes of national security. But then again, if we do that type of monitoring, who's to say that it does not benefit some of our defense industrial base? So that has always been sort of a fuzzy definition, but nonetheless, the United States government has made a strong argument that, hey, we do take that dividing line pretty seriously. And the fact that the Chinese government came back and said, all right, we'll play along as well, and we'll try and address that issue.
Yunsen, the Chinese Public Security Minister Guo Shenkun has said that China is willing to cooperate in various areas. He mentioned specifically countering terrorism, transnational crime, the narcotics trade, countering that as well. How can China help with these things?
Well, under the UN framework, both the United States and China are committed to counter narcotics, and there have been cooperations in various countries, like in the case of Burma or in the case of Afghanistan. But there have been such cooperation. But related to the issue of cybersecurity, I do want to make a point that although some US companies are more pleased with the Chinese lack or the decreased number of Chinese attacks, we see the issue evolving to a trade issue, because with the new cyber legislation that the Chinese government passed in the past 12 months, they are basically requiring American companies to surrender their technologies when they gain market access in China. So I guess you could argue that the amount of attacks the number of attacks has decreased, but it does not mean that China has reduced its effort to gain access to American technologies. But this is on the commercial side, not on the national security side.
Yeah. Ronald, let's look at something else that was discussed by these comprehensive dialogues, the whole question of repatriation of foreign nationals. You've done a lot of work on this. In fact, you prosecuted a very prominent case a few years back. What is this agreement about? How does it work?
Well, before becoming a private lawyer, I served in the Department of Justice, and I worked on several cases involving the prosecution and investigation of fugitives from China, mainly corruption fugitives in the United States. This is an issue that China holds very important and has done so for quite a while, given the large number of alleged fugitives in the United States. There is no extradition treaty between the United States and China, and the only mechanism, or the only mechanisms that would be available for having these suspects return from the United States to China would, number one, be through the immigration procedures, where if these individuals are here unlawfully, the U.S. immigration authorities would send them through the administrative process to have them removed from the United States to China. The second way is through the criminal process. And if these individuals are believed to have committed crimes in the United States, for example, money laundering or immigration fraud, then these are crimes that the United States can prosecute in the United States. And once these individuals are convicted and sentenced, then it becomes easier to have these individuals removed back to China. And that really is the focus of these fugitives in the United States, especially when anti-corruption is concerned. And that's the approach that has been adopted in a number of cases, somewhat successfully.
Christopher, how do you see it working? Is it going to work pretty smoothly?
I think that's as we move forward, I think it's going to be individual case by individual case, because a lot of these repatriation issues have political sensitivities. So, for example, a few years back when the United States Department of Justice indicted 5 PLA officers for engaging in illegal hacks into the U.S. system, the Chinese, of course, did not like that, and therefore they cut off the U.S.-China talks on cybersecurity. Similarly, there are individuals within the United States who are blabbing about the political leadership, and for the Chinese, they want to have those individuals come back. And that becomes a hot topic on Capitol Hill, the United States government hands over a political refugee to China. So these have wrapped up in them some political sensitivities that would be difficult to immediately just handle through a very generic cookie cutter repatriation act. I think it's going to be case by case.
Sun Yun, looking at that agreement that was released this morning by the White House, it was a joint agreement by the White House and by the Chinese. It said that the United States and China agree that timely responses should be provided to requests for information and assistance concerning malicious cyber activities. What does that mean? How's it going to work?
I think that's a part of the, at least in China, that's a part of the portfolio for the Ministry of Public Security if it's cybercrime. But in the United States, I'm sure the government is willing and is eager to pursue those exchange of information and the sharing of information. But on this, I also agree with Chris. I think a lot of the issues will be decided